Welcome, everyone. Kevin Carpenter here. I'm going with professional volunteer because I do this for so many conferences now, but I'm with Professor Shah. And I saw that on, I can't remember if it was on your YouTube channel. So, at Mike Shah, he's got his own YouTube channel and 16,000 plus subscribers, which I definitely can't claim anything to. Mine just get posted for the conferences. But we're here about the ACCU conference 2024 that starts on the 17th of April, goes to the 20th. There's some great pre-classes, and we'll talk about that. But Mike, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. Can't wait for ACCU. Looking forward to our conversation, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So, in all fairness, I was thinking about it this morning. I can't remember when I first met you. I just feel like I've known you for a long time, Mike. So, I mean, how many conferences? CPPCon, Core, I think.
Core CPP, yeah.
Meeting? No, you didn't make meeting this year, though.
I've not this past year. I've been before. Okay. I think it's been several years now and several adventures together. So it's always great talking with you.
Absolutely. So ACCU, I know you were there last year, I want to say, and you gave a talk, which was about teaching C++. And I mean, Professor Shah, that's your main gig, right? Tell me about that. Tell me about talk last year and your main gig.
Yeah. So I give a talk, let's see, at ACCU on how I teach C++, modern C++, one pixel at a time. And this is really a play off of one of Kate Gregory's talks from the conference many years ago at this point that I always look back to on how she teaches C++. So again, me basically stealing tricks from Kate, who's a wonderful speaker, programmer, trainer, everything.
Yes, she is. Yeah, she is.
and trying to just, steal as many of those tricks as I can and put them into my courses over the years and make programming really fun in C++ by having a graphical element. Again, so students understand the purpose of what they're doing. We're using the tools, the abstractions that C++ provides to, again, keep them motivated and, again, make C++ programming fun and to see the power in the language.
So that makes me think of programming logos, which I'm guessing is a ways further back from when you started. Yes,
this is true. I do have origins in basic programming, and funnily enough, that came up as a question during my talk about have you considered programming in Logo and Turtle graphics and these types of things.
I love the idea of using C++ from the graphical point because, I mean, let's face it, it's even CPPCon this year, they're going to have a big game dev track, which, I think is really cool. And let's be serious, there's probably not a game out there that doesn't have. I know that there are a lot, but you get the point I'm making. Like when it comes to performance, I think I read it in a piece that in one of your videos, it's like, even when you have something that's not necessarily, it might be a 2D scroller, but still from the fact of saving battery because you're running on a phone, it's your flight, the algorithm you just did a video on. You're doing it right now on YouTube.
The flyweight pattern. Yes.
That was it. It was like, and it's a great point. You're saving battery. And, either way, you're working with finite resources still. Not quite Z80 with 28 kilograms or 28K of RAM. But
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this great quote, which, speaking of ACCU, the first time I gave a talk at this conference way back in 2019 was on performance and cache oblivious algorithms and kind of doing a deep dive there. But one of the quotes I have is from Professor Charles Leisers, another professor, much wiser than me. But he kind of gave this gold nugget of performance is a currency for you. So, even if you don't need it, even if it is a simple 2D scroller, as you said, you're getting battery life, smoother experience. Maybe the code's more correct. You're not taking shortcuts. So it is always something to think about. And that's kind of one of the nice things about C++, right? We don't have any handicaps on performance for better or for worse, right?
Right. No, that's true. So it's interesting because, thinking of Kate Gregory, so I had the pleasure of working with her. I first met her because she was helping us with the contract to the company I was working at. And one of the quotes she would use on me a lot was working as a feature, because I would write something, and I'd be like, well, it works. And she would be like, yeah, I'm working as a feature. Even in performance, how much do you find that the code you're doing is iterative? Like you get that part, and then you're continually just improving upon that part. Is that the same experience for you? I mean, because I think as we progress in experience, you jump a level or two, but doesn't it always start that way? Is that
I think always, at least in my development, it's kind of, and maybe we get a little bit of a biased perspective, and you watch somebody like me giving a YouTube video because I've thought about a problem for a long time, long enough that I'm comfortable, right, recording it,
right?
and putting
Yes,
myself
yeah.
out there publicly. But development is so iterative. I mean, even often enough, it's like, oh, I need a sorting algorithm.
Right.
So you just reach for, whatever's in the standard library, or even there's even been times where I've just coded up a quick brute force sort because I wanted to see it sort of working. But we know that's not very performant. So
Right.
yeah, the development is so iterative, and understanding maybe the whys of why you're doing something is so important. I think maybe as you get to more, put in more years of developer experience in a specific domain, because it even changes domain to domain. Like if I'm in graphics, there are tricks you use for performance and how you architect your code, and then you move to something else, and maybe it's totally different. It's kind of interesting.
No, it is. So because we just did CPP online, and I unfortunately didn't see your talk because I went head to head with you. So
That's right. Yeah, I know. Why did they do that?
I got done with my talk, and I'd never done a fully online talk. So I have to say I was more nervous about doing a fully online talk than anything else.
Yeah.
Um, so it sorry, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's like when you're preparing for a talk and stuff, it is that difference of, you've prepped for the problem. But to that part of that's what I was saying is like for CPP online, my talk was about the intuition that we have when we're working with our tooling and stuff. And this was the second time I gave the talk, but the first time was in meeting. But this time in between, I started to learn Python.
Oh,
And so I've never written in Python before. I go back basic Turbo Pascal, PHP, Perl. I'm not, I joked about it in the talk. I'm still not so good with self. That just kind of, in Python. But the point is that I felt new. Like, when I would talk about the intuition talk, there was that part where in the talk, I've done C++ for a while. And so when I gave it the second time and I'd spent that time like learning a new tool set, learning a new layout, tabs actually mattered. It brought up something different, and it's like that far, yeah, I'm still working on my code, but far more iterative approach compared to what I would write in C++.
100%. Is like you said, learning a new language is something that's, I encourage everyone to do because it changes how you think, right? Again, as you mentioned, the performant way to do things in Python or, whatever language can often be, very, very different.
Yes.
Which is,
So for ACCU, I want to ask this because Gail Olis, she's running I want to say it's a 1-day early careers day for, junior developers. And that's running on Tuesday, April 16th. So being being an instructor, how important do you think is it for, because even that part, like I'm learning a new language and even all the knowledge that I have about how algorithms work. And I feel pretty raw from the way it started out. So, a conference like Gale's, or, I say conference, but a pre-conference workshop for students, what do you think?
Love it. Love it. If students can go who are either volunteering for the conference or are, just starting their career, it's amazing how, well, one, I can speak a little bit to Gail because I've known her in passing, very friendly, seen her at the ACCU conference. I was just listening to her CPP cast interview. So learning some of her background and understanding the psychology of software. She worked for many, many years as an experienced software engineer, I believe, and then went back and studied, well, how do we build it? How do teams, function together? So it sounds like, it's the right person for, a junior or someone getting started in their career to get some of these pieces of advice that could maybe save you years of time, along the road. Or maybe just
or
having that. Yeah.
no, I was going to say, or maybe going through your third interview with Facebook, because the first time, I'm not a computer science major. I never was. I was self-taught. And so,
Listen.
you know, going through a coding interview, at least it's online and not on a whiteboard. Because honestly, I'd rather have an editor than a whiteboard.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
but yeah,
Yep.
so if you're a new developer or new from college and you're trying to work on that next position, you might want to check out Gail's
I think.
pre-conference workshop. But to the point of learning and education in different languages, so your talk this year is on D and how D helps you with, C++, which I can appreciate because I do a lot more Go now. And I use tuples in a new way in C++ that I never did before Go, because, Go returns 2 and 3 things every time. So tell me about the talk. What inspired the talk?
Yeah. So, I started really getting serious about the D programming language probably 2 years ago and attending, the D conference and giving talks there. But D itself was born from Walter Bright, for those who don't know the history. And I'll give a brief history during the talk. But he is one of the folks who created, the Zortec C and C++ compilers, which were famously, back in the day, very optimized. And, he was sort of a one-man team. So, this very smart guy. And then he also has this history with the D programming language with Andrei Alexandrescu, who's also very popular in the C++ community and still giving talks, amazing talks, always entertaining and insightful. But anyways, throughout D's history, they've kind of teamed up and in some ways learned from C++'s lessons, I would say, as it was a language in the 90s, pre-modern C++, I would say.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a different path, but again, folks think of it as, C, C++, and then the joke is, the D language right after. But it's kind of interesting with the language and having learned it just in the same way that you're talking about Python, that different languages make you think in different ways.
Right.
So D has me thinking about different paradigms that it emphasizes. So things like templates and metaprogramming, they make sense to me in D because they've had time to learn from other languages or try out new things. And it, kind of learning or doing template metaprogramming and introspective coding, or that is, doing stuff at compile time, these other paradigms that are just now really becoming an emphasis of C++, but have been a mature part of the D language, has been very insightful to have almost like a playground to learn this stuff and then translate it into C++, for whatever domain I'm working in or if he's working in that language.
So I have to ask now, because D's the memory safe version of C++, Rust, how does it compare?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm starting to get some insights. Again, this is, as you mentioned, on YouTube. Folks can dig into that if they're interested. I've been doing a first impression series where I look at a language for 1 hour.
Yep.
And so I looked at Rust amongst many others. There's like 20. 20 languages now. But even when I think about Rust, as soon as I started playing around with it, and again, I'm not an expert, so Rust folks are going to correct me. But you immediately have to think about things like ownership, right? This is the famous thing with the borrow checker and so on.
Right.
And having various compile time guarantees. So Rust to me almost falls in between D and C++ in the middle somewhere. So now you're asking to look at
I was just so I didn't want to put you on the spot a little bit, but it was just more because we've all seen the article that came out that and it's funny because the thing that I think that's interesting on that is like I said, lately I've been doing a bit of Go because Go has a great interface for JWTs with Jose. The cryptography and everything's already built in, where there aren't that many C++ libraries that I've found that are actually doing JWTs well without having to do the OpenSSL. And so, however I was asked to write this in Go. And so I was listening to another YouTube person that was doing, Go examples, and he was talking about the latest release of Go, and he
Mm.
had this quote in there where basically said, the Go, when you're writing a router for HTTP, it won't return an error. So
Yeah.
it's one of the problems. But then the quote that got me is like, well, Go, they say they won't do this because they want to leave it backwards compatible for every version of Go before that. And it just made me go, because that's okay. So Go's, 10 years old now. C++ is what? 40?
Close
50?
to 50, I think. Yeah, 50 years probably. Close to that.
So it made me, it gave a different view of it. I'm like, okay, so you just have that point of breaking changes. And if Go, which is a new language, is experiencing that, I know Rust has been out for a while, but that makes me go, okay, is every language going to experience the same problem to a point? Because otherwise you have to have breaking changes. I mean, because that's why we went from Python 2 to Python 3, if I understand right, correct?
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a few points in here. One, I think it's interesting just how young our field is of computer science.
Yeah. Yes,
to talk about C++, that's nearing 50 years, I think. C is probably more than 50 or so years, but we look at that to biology, chemistry, math, etc. Those are measured in thousands of years, right?
Right.
And that's just the recorded history, right? Maybe more has been lost. But as you're talking about Go and Python and these different languages, it's interesting. And maybe this is a point, if I can sell my talk for folks to come,
absolutely,
to just come to the talk and see. It's not going to be a comparison talk where at the end I say this language is better, so use it. But exactly as you're talking about in your work, sometimes you're using Go, sometimes it's C++ or Python or whatever.
Yeah.
Picking out the right tool for the right job is important.
Yeah,
but oftentimes you don't experience what the different paradigms are in a single language. So you have to kind of dive into Rust, which enforces safety, and say, okay, it's about ownership and these types of things. Okay, in C++, that's unique pointer for everything, right? And then okay, it's a pretty safe language at that point, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You're almost getting the same guarantees, I mean, in some sense.
If you're actually writing modern stuff. But I didn't mind when that article came out because it just means kind of like COBOL programmers. I'm just going to get paid more all the way into retirement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Until ChatGPT can do all the optimizations for me, and that's okay. Then I'll just sit on it. But so I just have to dig and ask. So how much has your for where you are today? How's your experience from when you were writing web pages with ASP.NET and SQL?
Oh, you've done some good digging, yeah.
I tried a little bit what I can.
Yeah, I think my first official internship on paper, I did some like writing and freelance work and games, but I think the first official one was doing ASP.NET. I mean, all I can say is my code has changed a lot with how I write things and and what I've learned. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. How we start development. Maybe hopefully it's comforting for other folks to know that my journey was look at tutorial, look at Stack Overflow posts, glue stuff together, try to learn a little bit more iteratively.
Yeah.
And I probably wasn't even thinking at the level of paradigms and best practices and immutability and some of these things that can be very intimidating coming to different talks. But again, just taking out little pieces at a time and trying to apply them. So I started off as after my little game programming freelance work doing web development, which I quite enjoyed. Again, that quick visual feedback is useful for me.
Yeah, it is. And it is interesting because that part of I don't want it to be an age thing, but that's the part where it's like hitting the spot where when I was younger, everything was in focus right then. Whereas, when you get that arc finally of I remember when I was first doing C++, probably for my first 8 years, templates were just a no. You know, I was more of an application developer. You know, when Kate and I were working on that project, I hadn't even used the standard library that much because I was doing MFC and it was an old app. But to that part, it's like those incremental little pieces, which, you know, to the intuition talk, when I gave it the second time, it's like, that's the part that I think is interesting is, you know, every little bit that we pick up as a developer, it adds to the overall experience, which then just makes you a better developer. And some of the small things that you don't think end up having anything to do with code, even to your, you know, so as a teacher, you probably, because I noticed you spend most of your time in, well, I understand a lot of it's been in academia. So I do all the volunteering I do because I like helping out. It's good to see people. It's good to see, you know, do the part that I can to help people grow. Because I didn't get my PhD like you. Congratulations, because that's a lot of schooling and a lot of education. But you know what I'm saying? Like the part where we grow, and I think that's the part that I'm trying to, you know, just lead into conferences, talks, you know, struggling through that piece of code where you're taking a tutorial and trying to customize it because I don't want that feature. I need this feature. And then you spend an hour and a half staring at SQL Alchemy because it's got some self-reference that you don't understand. And no, I'm not speaking personally, not at all.
Yeah. I
well,
mean,
Mike, no, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, I wonder, just to flip this script, because I'm always thinking about asking my students a question. In this case, you're this
no, please
teacher,
do.
I'm the student, which is great.
But, no, I don't think that, but go ahead.
my years of schooling, they were just a marathon, which we're going to need a longer interview slot for that, but
yes, because it scrolls. It scrolls.
But I wonder if, you know, thinking about this topic, are there any talks, you know, whether at ACCU or others that you've listened to, you know, many years ago and you've actually revisit? Are there any that come to mind and you listen to it again and your perspective is, you know, changed, or you just pick up something way new?
So the thing that the reason I point out, you know, you've never been, you know, I don't want to say the joke, but it's like when I think of someone such as yourself and, you know, Patrice Roy, you know, someone that's really gone through, or a Karame, who's a volunteer that's worked with me a lot, you know, that are going through doctorates programs, you know, and my brother had gone through a doctorates program and the producing, you know, new artwork, I will say, as you're writing your thesis and stuff, which is just incredible to me. It's mind blowing to me because I literally started in school with, you know, I started with the Commodore 64. I learned Turbo Pascal on a CPM machine, as I was talking about yarn the other day. And so for me, you know, which I think points to both you and Klaus as well, the back to basics stuff really is, you know, those are the talks that I ended up revisiting a lot more. I'd say maybe not so much in the last couple of years, but when we first brought those talks out, because yeah, templates scared me. And not just me. So the company where I work, when I first started there for the first 4 years, we had some even older developers that started with Turbo C like I did. And templates, you better not have any template code in our stuff. Now, ironically, I work for a credit card processor. There is not that much difference from American Express, MasterCard, Visa, Citibank, Eurocard. That's perfect for templates, right? You know, that is the ideal spot where you would want to use it. But until you can make that leap, you know, I think is the big part. So for me, the back to basics talks, your talks, Klaus's talks, I've always enjoyed listening to Klaus. He does a great job at explaining patterns and stuff. I like Kate's talks too, just because you mentioned Kate. You know, Kate brings up those things that aren't just like naming is hard. That's one of my favorite talks that she gave because it really is. You know, it's like, oh, I'm just going to throw a name on this, and you don't think much about it. But yeah, when you actually go back and think about how we're trying to write self-documenting code, naming is really hard. You know, 100%. And so for me, those are the ones that, you know, and I still enjoy. But because of all of those kind of entry level, beginning level talks, you again, not being, I didn't take computer science in college. Everything I've learned has been in that. Pick up the book, pick up a tutorial. To your point, let's code out the algorithm just to see how it works. I know it's not as good as what's in the standard library, but then I understand that base, which to back that one step backwards further is where, for someone that's new and going for a job, when you got to sit down and somebody's like, okay, I want you to, code up a mutex from scratch. Why would I do a mutex from scratch? I mean, there's one in the standards. That's not the answer they want. I mean, it's the one you should use, but then you still better be able to code up the mutex, right? So, all to build knowledge.
Yeah. It's really fascinating how, well, as you said, there's no one right way to do it too, because often it's revisiting, learning from others, coming to conferences, where you get a lot of this knowledge that isn't. I try my best as a professor to give as much of a industry experience, but sometimes you just gotta dive in, live it a little bit, and talk to some of these experts who can give you good advice, kind of nudging you, one way or the other. So again, Gail's workshop sounds awesome. Just giving those little nuggets of advice. I mean, I'll give you one quickly here on Titus Winter. Always gives greatest. Titus Winter's on software engineering, and he taught me something I've been thinking a lot more about. Which really in our industry we need to think a lot more about people and how they're working together. But to think about when you write a piece of code, how long is it supposed to live?
Right.
And of course, he's someone who works on standard libraries and these great projects. But it's something I never really think about. And as we talk about this iterative code and performance, at the start of this talk, thinking about, well, maybe it is okay to just quickly scrap something together. But I better put a little note here that this is just temporarily, we might want to revisit this, create a little thing in the Jira log, to improve the performance or switch to the standard library or whatever. So that's something that really has changed how I approach my own software engineering, how much time I spend planning, which again, we're taught to do, but I feel like you just have to live it for a little bit. That important phase of planning. Yeah.
So I'll kind of close with this because it's funny you mentioned that about how long things live. I give the example in one of my talks about BCD, binary coded decimal, right? And so if you don't know it, look it up. You can store 2 single-digit numbers in a single byte, and this is still in the ISO standard, which all credit card processors use, because way back in the day, when you were dialing up on a modem, anything you could do to save bytes, including binary coded decimal. A 16 byte card number just became 8 bytes at 300 baud. That mattered. But to backwards compatibility is Go and C++ and every other language we'll have to deal with at some point. I'm still working with BCD all these years later. So
excellent. I'm going to clip this and show my students because we do learn that still.
There you go. Mike, I appreciate your time this morning. I look forward to seeing you at ACCU. I have never been, so you can show me the ropes when we get there. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time, Kevin. This has been a pleasure, and hope to see everybody at ACCU.
Talk to everybody then. Thanks.